Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. Disguised as a passenger. Amara Johnson, the visionary CEO of Skyrise Airlines, was known for her impeccable leadership and the trailblazing journey that brought her airline to the pinnacle of luxury aviation. But for Amara, Skyrise Airlines was more than just a business. It was a reflection of her values, respect, inclusion, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. Despite her pride in the airline's achievements, a troubling wave of customer complaints had recently tarnished its reputation. Reports of discrimination, cold service, and unprofessionalism among crew members left her deeply concerned. For Amara, this wasn't just about the company's image, it was personal. She'd built the airline from the ground up, often battling stereotypes and prejudices herself as a black woman in a male-dominated industry. The thought of her passengers enduring similar experiences on her flights was unacceptable. Determined to uncover the truth, Amara decided to take matters into her own hands. She planned an unannounced inspection, a covert mission to experience her airline's service as an ordinary passenger. She wanted to see, feel, and live what her customers experienced, without the privileges or recognition that came with her position. Preparing for the experiment, Amara spent hours planning her incognito journey. She opted for a modest outfit, simple jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a worn-out jacket. Her signature designer bags and jewelry were swapped for a generic duffel. Even her hairstyle was toned down, braids pulled into a low bun, a stark contrast to her usual sleek, professional look. As she gazed at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the image staring back. This wasn't the polished CEO who commanded boardrooms or graced magazine covers. This was an every woman, anonymous, unremarkable, and unnoticed. It was exactly what she wanted. Her plan was simple: purchase an economy ticket for Flight 726, one of Skyrise's busiest domestic routes, and observe the service discreetly. No one in her team, not even her personal assistant, knew about her plan. This was her mission, and she intended to carry it out alone. The journey begins. On the day of the flight, Amara walked through the airport with a strange mix of nerves and anticipation. For the first time in years, she carried her own bags, stood in line at security, and waited her turn at the check-in counter. At the counter, the agent barely made eye contact as they processed her ticket. Amara noticed how their tone was warm and friendly to other passengers, yet curt and indifferent toward her. She shrugged it off, chalking it up to the busyness of the morning rush. "Thank you," she said politely as she collected her boarding pass. The agent didn't respond, already turning to the next passenger. Amara sighed but remained focused. This was only the beginning. Blending into the crowd. As she made her way to the boarding gate, Amara was struck by the subtle but undeniable shift in how she was perceived. People often glanced at her, their eyes briefly scanning her appearance before looking away. She felt the quiet judgment, the kind that was neither overtly hostile nor welcoming, just dismissive. She reminded herself to stay calm. The goal was to observe, not to draw attention to herself. When boarding began, Amara joined the economy line, shuffling along with the other passengers. It was a strange sensation. On her usual flights, she was ushered onto the plane with VIP treatment, priority boarding, warm greetings, and even personal acknowledgments from the captain. Today, she was just another passenger. Once on the plane, she located her seat in the middle of the economy section. It was a tight fit, with barely enough legroom. She struggled slightly to place her bag in the overhead compartment, but no one offered to help. As she settled into her seat, a flight attendant named Sophia walked down the aisle, assisting other passengers with luggage and distributing smiles like confetti. When Sophia reached Amara, her demeanor shifted. Her smile disappeared, replaced by a neutral, almost dismissive expression. "Is this your seat?" Sophia asked, her tone flat. Amara nodded and handed over her boarding pass. Sophia scanned it quickly and handed it back without a word, moving on to the next passenger. Amara frowned but said nothing. This was exactly why she was here, to observe without interfering. The reality unfolds. As the flight prepared for takeoff, Amara began to notice patterns. Sophia and the other crew members were attentive and polite to most passengers, offering assistance and engaging in light conversation. But when it came to her, the warmth evaporated. When the drink service began, Amara decided to test her theory. "Excuse me," she said softly as Sophia approached with the beverage cart. "Could I have a glass of water?" Sophia paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she glanced at Amara. "We'll get to you when we have time," she replied curtly, moving on to the next row without another word. Amara felt a pang of disappointment but forced herself to remain composed. She leaned back in her seat, observing how the crew interacted with other passengers. It became increasingly clear that Sophia's attitude toward her wasn't an isolated incident, it was a deliberate choice. A moment of humiliation. Things took a turn during the second beverage round. Sophia approached with the cart, her movements brisk and deliberate. As she reached Amara's row, her hand slipped, and a cup of hot coffee tumbled off the tray, spilling directly onto Amara's lap. A sharp gasp escaped Amara's lips as the scalding liquid seeped into her clothes, burning her skin. "Oh, sorry," Sophia said, her tone dripping with insincerity. "Guess you should have been more careful." Amara looked up, stunned. Around her, passengers whispered and exchanged glances, but no one spoke up. "Could I get a napkin, please?" Amara asked, her voice calm but firm. Sophia smirked. "We're out of napkins," she said dismissively, pushing the cart away without a backward glance. Amara sat frozen, the humiliation sinking in deeper than the burn of the coffee. For the first time in years, she felt powerless. But deep inside, a fire began to ignite, a determination to transform this moment of disgrace into a catalyst for change. A test of patience. Amara Johnson sat still in her seat, her clothes soaked with cooling coffee and her face burning with humiliation. The sting of the hot liquid on her skin was nothing compared to the pain of being belittled by someone on her own staff. Around her, passengers continued to whisper, their eyes darting between her and the indifferent flight attendants. She wiped at her lap with the edge of her sleeve, her mind racing. This wasn't just about her. How many others had endured such treatment on Skyrise Airlines? How many passengers, lacking the power or platform to voice their experiences, had simply swallowed their anger and vowed never to fly her airline again? This moment was no longer about gathering evidence, it had become personal. Amara realized she was no longer just observing, she was now living the very injustice she had set out to uncover. Isolation among the crowd. As the flight continued, Amara's treatment worsened. Other passengers received attentive service, warm smiles, and polite interactions. When Sophia and another flight attendant, Daniel, walked the aisles, their eyes seemed to pass right over Amara as if she were invisible. When the food service began, Amara decided to test her theory once again. "Excuse me," she said as Daniel approached her row. He hesitated, his eyes flickering with mild irritation. "Yes? Could I have a meal, please?" Daniel glanced at his tray, then back at Amara. "We're out of your meal choice," he said bluntly, though Amara noticed there were still several trays left. "That's fine," she said evenly. "I'll take whatever is available." "We're out of everything," he replied curtly, turning away without another word. Amara's hands tightened into fists under the tray table. She glanced around, noticing the sympathetic looks from a few nearby passengers. One elderly woman even leaned over, her voice low. "Some people just don't know how to treat others," she whispered. Amara smiled faintly in gratitude but didn't respond. She didn't want to draw more attention to herself. An unexpected ally. Just as Amara was beginning to feel completely isolated, a young woman across the aisle caught her eye. She was in her mid-20s, with curly hair tied back into a ponytail and a kind expression. "Are you okay?" the woman asked softly. Amara hesitated, unsure whether to share her feelings. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady. The woman frowned. "No, you're not. I saw what happened with the coffee, and I heard how they spoke to you. It's not right." Amara's chest tightened with emotion. For the first time during this ordeal, someone had acknowledged the injustice. "I appreciate that," Amara said, her voice sincere. "But it's fine." "Really?" The woman shook her head. "It's not fine. People shouldn't be treated like that, no matter who they are." Her words struck a chord in Amara, who smiled in quiet gratitude. The breaking point. The flight's tension reached its peak when Sophia and Daniel approached Amara's seat together. Their expressions were a mix of irritation and barely concealed contempt. "Ma'am," Sophia began, her tone sharp, "we've received complaints from other passengers about your behavior." Amara blinked in surprise. "Complaints?" "Yes," Daniel chimed in. "Passengers have said you've been causing disturbances and disrupting the service flow." Amara's mouth fell open. She had barely spoken a word throughout the flight, and now they were accusing her of causing trouble? "I've done no such thing," she said firmly, her voice calm but unwavering. Sophia crossed her arms, her lips curling into a smirk. "Look, ma'am, if you don't stop causing issues, we'll have to involve the captain." Amara stared at them, her heart pounding. The injustice of the situation threatened to overwhelm her. She thought about standing up, revealing her identity, and putting an immediate end to their behavior. But then she stopped herself. "No," she thought. "If I do that now, they'll never understand the impact of their actions." Amara forced herself to remain seated, her expression neutral. "I'd like to speak with the captain," she said simply. Sophia and Daniel exchanged glances, before turning and walking away. Facing the captain. A few moments later, the captain, a tall man named Mike, approached Amara's seat. His expression was serious, his brows furrowed as he addressed her. "Ma'am, I've been informed that you're causing a disturbance," he said. "Is that true?" Amara met his gaze evenly. "No, it's not," she said. "I've done nothing but ask for basic service, water, a napkin, and a meal. If that's considered a disturbance, then I'd like to know why." The captain hesitated, his stern demeanor faltering slightly. He looked at Sophia and Daniel, who stood behind him with their arms crossed. "I've been observing this crew throughout the flight," Amara continued, her voice calm but authoritative. "And I can assure you, the only disturbance has been their deliberate neglect and mistreatment." Passengers around them began to murmur, their curiosity piqued. Some nodded in agreement, while others leaned closer to hear the exchange. The captain glanced at the nearby passengers, realizing he was under scrutiny. His tone softened. "I'll look into this, ma'am," he said finally, before turning and walking back to the cockpit. A moment of reflection. As the plane began its descent, Amara sat back in her seat, her mind racing. She had endured more than she ever expected on this flight, but the experience had given her invaluable insight into the state of her airline. She realized that the problem wasn't just a few rude employees, it was a systemic issue. Somewhere along the way, the culture of respect and inclusion she had worked so hard to build had eroded. But Amara wasn't discouraged. If anything, the experience had strengthened her resolve to make things right. As the plane touched down, Amara took a deep breath. This journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Unmasking the truth. The plane landed with a jarring thud, mirroring the turbulence Amara Johnson had experienced throughout the flight. She remained seated, watching as passengers began to disembark. Sophia and Daniel avoided her gaze entirely, while the other crew members seemed indifferent, acting as though she didn't exist. Amara took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She stood slowly, gathering her carry-on bag, and stepped into the aisle. As she made her way toward the front of the plane, she caught snippets of conversations, passengers quietly expressing surprise or disdain over how she had been treated. Still, no one had spoken up, revealing the unexpected. As Amara exited the plane, the captain stood near the cockpit door. He gave her a perfunctory nod, his eyes darting away quickly. Clearly, he was eager to end the interaction. "Thank you for the flight," Amara said calmly, her voice carrying a note of finality. She stepped into the terminal and moved toward the customer service desk. Instead of revealing her identity immediately, she took a moment to gather her thoughts. This wasn't just about one flight or one crew, it was about addressing the systemic issues that had allowed such behavior to flourish. Amara approached the desk, where a middle-aged woman in a Skyrise Airlines uniform greeted her with a strained smile. "How can I assist you today?" the woman asked. Amara set her bag down and straightened her posture. "I'd like to speak with the station manager, please." The woman blinked in surprise. "May I ask why?" "You may," Amara replied. "I'd like to discuss the service I received on Flight 437. The woman hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. After a moment, she picked up the phone and made a call. Within minutes, a man in a sharp suit approached, his expression professional but guarded. "I'm Greg, the station manager," he said, extending his hand. "What seems to be the issue?" Amara shook his hand firmly. "I believe it would be best to discuss this matter in private." The boardroom revelation. Greg led Amara to a small conference room tucked away in the corner of the terminal. She sat at the table, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "Now," Greg began, "how can I assist you?" Amara placed her bag on the floor and folded her hands on the table. "Greg," she said evenly, "do you know who I am?" Greg frowned, clearly confused. "I'm afraid I don't." "My name is Amara Johnson," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I am the CEO and founder of Skyrise Airlines." Greg's eyes widened, and his mouth fell open slightly. I had no idea," he stammered. "That's the point," Amara replied. "I boarded that flight as an ordinary passenger to evaluate the service my airline provides. What I experienced was nothing short of shocking." She recounted the incidents in detail, the cold stares, the blatant neglect, and the humiliation she had endured. Greg listened intently, his face growing more somber with each word. "This is not the airline I built," Amara said, her voice tinged with disappointment. "I need to understand how this happened and, more importantly, how we're going to fix it. The investigation begins." Greg immediately sprang into action, arranging a meeting with the crew of Flight 437. Amara insisted on observing the conversation but remained in the background, not revealing her presence just yet. Sophia and Daniel entered the room first, their expressions smug and confident. They clearly hadn't been informed about who would be in attendance. Greg began by addressing the service complaints. "We've received reports about unprofessional behavior on Flight 437, he said. "Specifically toward a passenger in economy class." Sophia rolled her eyes. "Passengers always complain," she said dismissively. "Some people are just impossible to please." Amara's jaw tightened, but she kept silent. "Is that how you view our customers?" Greg asked, his tone sharp. Sophia hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Well, no," she said quickly. "But sometimes you get passengers who just don't fit the profile, you know?" Amara's heart sank. There it was, the unspoken prejudice that had permeated the culture of her airline. A confrontation with accountability. Finally, Amara stepped forward, her presence commanding. Sophia and Daniel froze, their faces draining of color as they recognized her. "Ms. Johnson?" Sophia stammered, her confident demeanor crumbling. "Yes," Amara said, her voice steady. "It's me, the passenger you ignored, humiliated, and poured coffee on during Flight 437. Daniel looked away, his face pale. "We didn't know," he muttered. "That's exactly the problem," Amara said, her voice rising slightly. "You didn't know who I was, so you assumed I wasn't important enough to deserve your respect. Is that how you treat all our passengers who don't fit the profile?" Sophia opened her mouth to respond but quickly closed it, her eyes darting nervously. Amara turned to Greg. "This isn't just about these two employees," she said. "This is about the culture we've allowed to take root in our airline. It's about the systemic failure to uphold the values of respect, dignity, and fairness that Skyrise was founded on. A plan for change." The meeting ended with swift action. Sophia and Daniel were suspended pending further investigation, and Amara outlined an immediate plan to overhaul the airline's training programs. She announced mandatory workshops on diversity, empathy, and customer service for all employees, from entry-level staff to senior management. She also launched an anonymous feedback system for passengers, ensuring that every voice could be heard without fear of retaliation. "This isn't just about damage control," Amara said to Greg after the meeting. "This is about rebuilding trust, with our passengers, our employees, and ourselves." A renewed mission. As Amara left the terminal, she felt a mix of exhaustion and hope. The journey to reform Skyrise Airlines would be long and challenging, but she was ready to face it head-on. This experience had reminded her of why she had started the airline in the first place, to create a space where every passenger, regardless of their background, was treated with respect and dignity. And now, more than ever, she was determined to make that vision a reality. A new horizon. Amara returned to her headquarters with a renewed sense of purpose and an unshakable resolve. The events of Flight 437 had exposed the cracks in her airline's foundation, but they also illuminated the path forward. She knew this wasn't just about improving service, it was about rebuilding the core values Skyrise Airlines had been founded on. A personal address. The next morning, Amara called an all-hands meeting at the company's headquarters. Every employee, from the janitorial staff to senior executives, was invited to attend, with others joining remotely. As the CEO, Amara had addressed the company many times before, but this speech felt different. It was personal, raw, and urgent. Standing on the stage in the company's auditorium, Amara surveyed the room. Her team looked back at her, some faces curious, others nervous. She took a deep breath and began. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Many of you know me as the CEO of Skyrise Airlines. But today, I stand before you not as a leader, but as a passenger." The room fell silent. "Last week, I boarded one of our flights as an ordinary customer," she continued. "I did this to experience firsthand what our passengers encounter every day. What I found was deeply troubling." She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. "I witnessed discrimination, neglect, and outright hostility. Not just toward me, but toward the values we claim to uphold. This isn't just unacceptable, it's heartbreaking." Amara's voice cracked slightly, but she steadied herself. Skyrise Airlines was built on a promise of respect, dignity, and equality for everyone who steps onto our planes. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that promise. And for that, I take full responsibility. The room remained quiet, but the weight of her words was palpable. A plan for action. Amara went on to outline a comprehensive plan to transform the airline's culture. She announced the immediate implementation of the following initiatives. Customer-centered training. All employees, from entry-level staff to senior management, would undergo intensive training programs focusing on empathy, diversity, and customer service excellence. Passenger Advocacy Council. Amara introduced a new council composed of frequent flyers, employees, and external experts. The council's mission would be to review and address passenger complaints, ensuring every voice was heard. Real-time feedback. Each flight would now have a dedicated feedback system, accessible to passengers in real time. This would allow issues to be addressed promptly, rather than buried in post-flight surveys. Leadership accountability. Amara pledged to personally oversee the reforms, with quarterly updates shared publicly. "Leadership starts at the top," she said. "And I will be the first to lead by example." Restorative justice. For passengers who had previously faced mistreatment, Skyrise Airlines would offer personal apologies, compensation, and an invitation to help shape the airline's future policies. "This isn't just about fixing what's broken," Amara concluded. "It's about building something better, something stronger, fairer, and more compassionate." The room erupted in applause. Facing the crew. Amara knew that her journey wasn't over. The next step was confronting the individuals responsible for the incident on Flight 437. She arranged a private meeting with Sophia, Daniel, and Captain Mike. The atmosphere was tense as the three employees entered the room, their expressions a mix of apprehension and defiance. Amara wasted no time. "You know why you're here," she said, her tone firm but measured. "Your actions didn't just hurt me, they betrayed the trust of every passenger who boards our planes." Sophia looked down, her confidence completely eroded. I didn't realize." She began, but Amara raised a hand to stop her. "That's the problem," Amara said. "You didn't realize, because you didn't care to look. You judged me based on my appearance, and you acted as though I didn't deserve the same respect as other passengers." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't mean any harm," he mumbled. "It was just a bad day." Amara's gaze hardened. A bad day doesn't justify mistreatment. If you're having a bad day, you take a moment, you breathe, and you remind yourself why you're here, to serve. If you can't do that, you don't belong in this industry. Captain Mike, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Ms. Johnson, I take full responsibility for not stepping in. As the leader on that flight, I failed to set the right example." Amara nodded, appreciating his honesty. "Acknowledging your failure is the first step. But words aren't enough. Change is what matters." She then outlined their consequences. Sophia and Daniel would undergo a probationary period, during which they would participate in intensive retraining. Any further misconduct would result in immediate termination. Captain Mike would be required to lead a company-wide workshop on leadership and accountability, sharing his experience as a cautionary tale. "This isn't just about punishment," Amara said. "It's about growth. But make no mistake, if you fail to uphold our standards again, there will be no second chances." The ripple effect. Over the next few months, the reforms Amara implemented began to take root. The airline's new initiatives were met with widespread praise from passengers and industry experts alike. Customer satisfaction scores soared, and Skyrise Airlines quickly regained its reputation as a leader in the aviation industry. Amara also noticed a shift within her own team. Employees who had once felt disconnected now took pride in their work, inspired by the company's renewed commitment to excellence. Crew members went out of their way to provide exceptional service, and passengers began sharing stories of their positive experiences on social media. One day, as Amara walked through the terminal, a young woman approached her. "Ms. Johnson," she said, her voice filled with emotion, "I was on flight 437. I saw everything that happened. I wanted to thank you, for standing up, for making a difference." Amara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you for your kind words," she said. "But the real change comes from all of us, working together to create something better." A legacy of resilience. Amara's journey wasn't just a personal transformation, it was a testament to the power of resilience, accountability, and compassion. She had faced adversity head-on and emerged stronger, turning a moment of pain into a movement for change. Skyrise Airlines became more than an airline, it became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of injustice, there is always an opportunity to rise above and make a difference. And as Amara stood at the gate of a departing flight, watching passengers board with smiles on their faces and confidence in their hearts, she knew this was only the beginning of her legacy.